Okay, so welcome everyone to this free webinar on storytelling, how to use storytelling to grow your business. My name is Nick Bowditch. I'm a storyteller. I'm also a marketer. I'm one of the few people in the world who's worked at both Facebook and Twitter in the marketing departments, or at all actually. And now I advise startups and small businesses, as well as invest in some, and do some consulting and mentoring around storytelling, marketing, and so on, and how to grow your business, basically, as I was able to do with my businesses before being recruited by those big brands. I'm also a speaker, and I speak at events and conferences around Australia and outside of Australia now too, which is great, about storytelling and marketing and how to grow your business using cheap or free means, and that's where we join in today. So this is me. I always start with this slide. Authenticity is very important to me, and this is as authentic as it gets for me. This is my authentic self. As I just said to you, I am one of the few people in the world to have worked at both Facebook and Twitter. I'm the only person in the world to have worked in marketing at both brands. And so I want to bring some of the storytelling aspects from that work, as well as the work in my own startups, as well as developing and helping other people's startups with their businesses as well. As you can see, I'm a prolific breeder. We live at Terrigal on the central coast of New South Wales, which is just near Sydney, or pretty close to Sydney. So yeah, hopefully this is coming through okay, and everyone can see the full screen. What I thought we might do today is, just as I start most of my presentations with this, I thought I would do it today as well. I really want you to think differently about one thing, about one part of your marketing or one part of your business growth or business development plan differently to how you would have thought before I spoke to you today. So, you know, that might be just very, very simple, or it might be a very major thing. Either way, I'm happy that you have thought about it slightly differently to when we started. That's super important to me. So the first thing I want to talk about is the 7 reasons or the 7 things that I think go into a plan for storytelling for your business. So this was worked out by myself and Andrew Griffiths, who's another really great Australian storyteller and best-selling author, when we did a series of lecture and performance pieces called The Art of Storytelling, and we break it down to a model of 7 things. The first thing is, why tell the story? So for a brand, that's fairly obvious. You want to tell the story because you want to build your brand and you want more people to know about your business and so on. But there's a real strong reason below that, right? So sometimes you want to tell your story because you're doing a poor job of PR. You're doing a poor job of having your brand resonate in the community, whatever it is. Sometimes you want to tell your story because your brand story has changed dramatically. You might have just got a whole heap of capital investment. You want to talk about that. You might have, be pulling back a product. You want to talk about that, whatever it might be. The why here is very, very important. Why tell your story is the first thing I would think about before I sit down with any business and start to work out a different storytelling plan from there. The second thing is then, well, can you tell it authentically? Can you tell the story in an authentic way because you're part of it, or because you had a hand in changing it, or because it matters to you or your family that your story has changed? Are you telling the story on somebody else's behalf? And sometimes I work with PR people and professional storytellers in that vein, that they have to tell the story of other people's businesses, which is basically meaning they have to tell other people's stories. And it's really hard sometimes to do that authentically, or to do it in a real way. So that would be the second thing I'd ask myself is, well, can you tell this story authentically? Is it your story to tell, basically? Then, is it an appropriate story to be told? Now, we included this because sometimes parts of your story don't need to be told to the wider world. Sometimes, and it's not because you're being sneaky or anything else, it's just, sometimes professionally, there doesn't need to be every part of the story told. Sometimes, though, we hold back on the stuff we think the world doesn't want to know, and that's actually the stuff they do want to know. And that's important too. So, I think in determining whether it's an appropriate story to be told and whether you can tell it authentically are the 2 sort of pieces in front of the gate, if you like, of really setting off a brand storytelling and storytelling in general really, really well. The fourth thing is, what is the key message to take away? What do you really want to leave the reader or the consumer or the public with? What message do you really want them to remember of you and your brand? Importantly, the converse of this is also true. What's the thing that you don't want them to take away? Is the fact that I'm a bit crap at running webinars on my own the message that I want people to take away? Probably not. So I'm going to try and, dance around that and blame my computer probably if something goes wrong. But, what is the key message you want the punters to take away? Very, very important before you even start, because often that can dictate the form and the direction of the story rather than that they're being reactive to the story along the way and you having to change your story, which even if you're telling the truth, might seem like a lie. The fifth thing then is we'll outline the story. And I'm going to talk about story arcs and story planning in a second, but it's super important to know what parts of the story you're going to tell and when and by who or by whom. Who is going to tell those parts of the story? That's really important too. And so in the outline of the story isn't just when and what, but also who. Then what is the best vehicle for this story? So we'll talk about this in a bit of depth in a minute, but is the best vehicle for your story Snapchat? Is the best vehicle for your story Facebook, Twitter, your website, spoken word, a letterbox drop, the newspaper, TV, whatever it might be? I think this is something to get in sort of in your mind before you start, because again, that can determine the direction and the form of the story, rather than having to react to it later and go, oh, geez, we've only ever done everything on TV, and now we have to work out how to tell a story on Snapchat. Let's have all that in place beforehand. Know what the best vehicle is for the story. Now, the other thing about this though is we're not saying what is the only vehicle for your story. So I just want you to work out your story in terms of what the best vehicle is going to be. And then all the others that aren't the best might be able to just adapt, because the best story is, as you've determined it, the one who's going to reach the most people and be the most effective in the most timely fashion and for the the least cost, I should say. And then most importantly, for people who've heard me speak before, I bang on a lot about if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. How will you know that your story has been received? How do you know that your story has gotten through to your consumers and they're taking action that you want them to take? Even if that's just how you make them think about you and your brand afterwards. Like, how are you really going to measure the efficacy and the efficiency of your message going through to the public on a particular vehicle? Are you going to measure it in likes? Are you going to measure it in comments received, minutes watched on YouTube, whatever it might be? How do you know if your message has been received? Really, really important. And that sort of was the 7 things that Andrew and I worked out to be a pretty good model around brand storytelling and the things that you want to get right before you even start. So why tell the story? Can you tell it authentically? Is it an appropriate story for you to tell? What's the key message you want the punter to take away? How will the story be outlined? So what and when, but also who is going to tell that story? What's the best vehicle for your story, the best platform that your story is going to be told on? And then how do you know how to measure it? How do you know it's been received? So why is storytelling important? The first thing is we are social creatures, right? Social media and the absolute avalanche of how Facebook in particular has taken over the world, and now Snapchat is doing the same at a similar rate, means that we want to connect with people. We need that connectedness. We're social in our nature. And the most sort of basic but valuable tool for social creatures is the ability to tell stories. Even if that's cave paintings in prehistoric times right through to the modern day of Facebook and whatever, story has always been really important. It's been an important way to stay alive, obviously, for a lot of time in cave paintings. This thing is fucking huge and is going to eat you, and things like that, which is pretty handy to know. Right through to, a story about some kid who choked from a peanut allergy, and that determines how you then treat your children with allergies and so on. So we've always been social creatures, and storytelling is the most basic way to be social and stay connected. The second reason storytelling is important, particularly for a brand, is because we hate being sold to. We hate it. I mean, a lot of us hate selling, and I'm one of them, but we hate being sold to even more. But who doesn't like a story being told to them? Like everyone loves stories. So even though you might hate being sold to, you don't hate stories being told to you, and that's why storytelling is important. Storytelling builds empathy. Now, empathy is really important in the business world, business to consumer, because especially in small business where the majority of small businesses, or all of small businesses, are selling exactly the same thing to exactly the same people for exactly the same price. That's pretty much how you sum up small business, right? So if there's no empathy along the way at any of those connecting nodes, then really you're just another one of the apples in the barrel, right? So how do you build empathy? That's by using storytelling, by saying, this is what we sell and this is how much we sell it for and all that stuff. But this is why. This is what it'll mean to you. This is what it'll change your life with. This is what it means to us as a company and so on. That kind of empathy you can't buy. And then the last reason is that stories motivate voluntary cooperation. So from a marketing point of view, from a marketing 101 point of view, marketing is cooperation, is the search or that kind of urging for cooperation from the consumer. And stories motivate that, not only cooperation, but voluntary cooperation, which is what you really want. Now, what I want to do now is just show you an excerpt from a piece that I love that was written in the Harvard Business Review. Now, I know this is a lot of letters on a slide. That's kind of breaking my letters on a slide rule, and I'm going to do the second thing I hate, which is read it to you. But the only reason I do that is because it's really important, this, and it breaks down the whole reason I tell stories for a living and help other people tell stories for a living too. As social creatures, we depend on others for our survival and happiness. A decade ago, Paul Zak and his lab discovered that a neurochemical called oxytocin is a key "it's safe to approach others" signal in the brain. Oxytocin is produced when we are trusted or shown a kindness, and it motivates cooperation with others. It does this by enhancing the sense of empathy, our ability to experience others' emotions. Empathy is important for social creatures because it allows us to understand how others are likely to react to a situation, including those with whom we work. That is basically brand storytelling 101, right? Make people empathetic towards what you're trying to do, towards what it's going to mean to them. Have them react to a situation the way you want them to react. Like have some sort of impetus over that. This is all you really need to know about storytelling in 2 sentences, and that's why I wanted to include the whole thing. There's other reasons too where storytelling is important. With the average person that has an attention span of 7 seconds, right? But the goldfish outdoes us. Now the goldfish gets a bit of a bad rap at not being very, attention giving, but I was going to say Australians, but humans are even worse, right? So we need to tell our story and tell it quickly to be able to then buy some more time from people to tell your advanced story or give them the excerpt so you can give them the whole story down the track. And the other thing is then visual storytelling is a lot better than just say copy or text storytelling. Now, if I showed you this tweet, right, and then the great white shark jumped totally out of the water with the seal in its mouth, you should have seen it. It was awesome. #Shark Week. You tell me what you think is going to get better cut through as a storytelling feature, that tweet or that picture. It's pretty obvious, right? So visual storytelling is super important, and the ability to use image and in particular video to tell your story has never been more important. There's a couple of rules around storytelling which I want to go through too, which if you're going to sit down and organize your story, this is a few things which I think I would keep in mind, right? The first thing is the old journalism adage of show, don't tell. Now, the cross on the TV news, the cross to the city that's on fire the building that's on fire in the center of the city, and a guy standing outside of it saying, or even like that, even the reporter in the studio saying there's a fire in a building on the corner of Smith and Jones Street. Yeah, it's really bad. It looks totally out of control. There's people screaming and glass shattering and stuff. Like that's one way to tell a story. It's a pretty poor way to tell a story. This second way, though, the better way to tell a story is to go across to a guy standing outside the building that's on fire and saying, oh, geez, I can feel the heat from it. It's, I can hear the noises. It's a completely out of control. There's fire brigade, and I can hear the sirens and people yelling and stuff like that. That's show, don't tell, right? So storytelling is kind of a furphy for me because it should be story showing. We want to be showing people our story rather than being caught up in, having to just tell people, having to relay information in that way. People look where they're told to, right? So this is important too, because if you want to tell your whole story, that's fine. If you've taken over your brand from a business that maybe had a poor history of customer service like that, you don't want to necessarily call that out unless you're going to say, we're going to do heaps better at that. But people look at the part of your story where they're told to. Those, the fact that pay now buttons are all big and green instead of, little and red are pretty synonymous with being able to know this is how I pay. This is where I have to get my wallet out and so on. So think about in your story, think about the parts that you really, really want to tell, those key takeaway messages, and direct people to them. Like direct people straight to them. Look here, click on this red arrow, click on this whatever it might be. That stuff is really, really important. It's important to just come back to empathy once more for a moment. We're hardwired more for empathy than we are for love or hate. Now, if you think about watching a scary movie or watching a sad movie, you're not thinking about the axe murderer coming through or the couple that's broken up. You're thinking from an empathetic point of view of being potentially a victim running away from that danger or being part of that couple that's broken up. That's the power of story, where you can look at it and go, geez, that could be me. I never used to cry at almost anything. And now I cry in movies all the time, or especially if I'm watching the news and there's some story about kids in particular, that are in famine or refugees or something like that. That really gets to me because all I can think of is, shit, what if that was my kids? I think about it from that point of view all the time. And I think it just proves that, we are more hardwired, more for empathy than love or hate. Don't pick a side necessarily and make yourself good or bad. Make yourself something that they can feel, something that they can believe in. That's much more important. And politicians and politics certainly knows this. We are more affected by brands and logos when we are scared or sad. Now, I don't mean you should rush out of here and make everyone sad or scared, but, think about the emotive trigger, thinking about pulling on that emotive lever and being able to say, we can change your life this way. We can do this for you this way. Our story is great and it's moving and it's emotional and whatever because of this. Think about pulling the emotional trigger. No matter whether you have a really emotional brand or not, your brand might not be known for being very emotional or very connected emotionally, but there's always an emotive trigger, right? And emotions is how people buy. Emotions is how people make decisions. So think about really tapping into that. And people are lazy, so make it easy for them. Don't put friction in front of the story and someone buying your story or buying your product, right? Make it as easy as you possibly can for people to start the story, get through and leave with the takeaway messages that you want to. Don't make it hard. Don't make it 5 pages if it should be 1. Don't make it lots and lots of reading if you can make a video, right? And then kids certainly know this around Christmas time, that waiting is better than getting. The anticipation factor in story is really, really powerful and really well used actually in motion pictures mostly, especially thrillers and stuff like that. The waiting is much better than the getting. And often in a movie, I think of a movie like Gone Girl, which is a fantastic movie with a crap ending. The waiting is really, really great leading up to it, and the resolution is not that great. So think about how you can tell your story along the way of keeping people hooked, keeping people turning the corner, maybe keeping them buying the next product or whatever it might be. Waiting is better than getting. And there's storytelling structures too that will help you too. If you think about, I don't structure everything, but I structure all of my stories, right? All the story stuff I think about comes from a very basic structure. And basically there's 10 different traditional structures that people can choose from to tell stories. And this is, whether that's storytelling being feature films and so on, or whether it be brands, these 10 have always featured in some way. Or you can choose your own, right? But I just leave those there because that is a traditional storytelling piece that, one of those 10 things your story should sort of fall under. But even more basically than that, I always think about stories in this way: three different prongs, right? The way it's always been, the status quo, how it's changed or how you have changed it, and the way it is now or the way it will be because of what you've done to change it. Those three things are very, very simple, but very, very structured and a good way to keep you on track, start, finishing, end. Start, beginning, start, middle, and end, sorry. So the way it's always been, how it's changed, and the way it is now. And if I pull that out a little bit better again, a little bit wider again, and some of you have already seen me do this, but I think it's worth repeating it, that, you know, this sort of structure is the structure that was told to us, the stories that were told to us when we were little babies was in this structure. You know, once upon a time there was three wolves, and every day they went to the markets, and then one day one of them wanted them because of that, and so on, right? So this sort of, I think about this structure, honestly, every time I create a Facebook post, every time I write a post, every time I write a tweet or design a new web page or think of a new product or whatever it might be. I think, well, once upon a time or forever and ever we did this, right? And then every day something, you know, we did the same thing every day, and this is what people were happy or unhappy with, right? But then one day we decided to change, and because of that, we created this program. And because of that, we've now done this, until finally everyone lives happily ever after. Now, you can tell the brand story of the most boring and dull brand in the world. You can use this story structure and it'll make it seem right. It'll make it seem true. The reason being, when we're a little baby and our brains are forming, people are telling stories to us in this structure. So as we grow, when we hear this structure again in story, or we don't even sort of consciously hear it, we trust it, right? Because it's the same storytelling structure that the one or two most important people in the world to us when we were children used. And that's why it's really important. And I often use this slide too. This is obviously Frozen. And this I use this because it's a great way of explaining story arcs and how story arcs bite a story. So a story arc, which is ARC, is basically a part of the story that ebbs and flows or weaves within other story arcs to tell a full and complete story, right? So in film, in particular, the story arcs are people or those relationships between the two people, between characters. But in your point of view, from a brand's point of view, story arcs might be a product or a shop or a location or a website versus your Facebook or whatever it might be. So let me just quickly show you how this affects Frozen, and then we'll talk about how it might be used in your business. So you can see here, this is a timeline of Frozen from start to the end. There's sort of significant events happening through there, but then when you overlay the story arcs, this is how it looks. And I've just put 5 story arcs in here and used the 5 characters out of the film, and you can see basically that, you know, the 2 girls, for instance, which is the purple and the pink on the top 2, they stay together for the whole movie until the coronation day when the Queen goes a bit mental and they break up a little bit, but then they resolve to be together at the end. So you can see, even if you didn't know the story, you could kind of look at the story arcs and go, okay, something has gone wrong there, but then it's resolved to a happy ending. So I show you that not because to show off how many times I've seen Frozen, but I think you can use it in your own brand too. If I think about a 6-week lead in, so you can see 42 days down here, 6-week lead into an opening of a second store for a boutique, for instance, right? And we're going to overlay different story arcs. The first one is the Twitter account of the ABC boutique that's opening the new store. So 6 weeks out, the boutique says, you know, on their Twitter account, says, yep, we're looking for a new store. We found it here. And you can see as we go along, we start to talk about we've secured the building now. We've fitted it out. We're starting to move all the clothes in. It looks really great. We're really happy with it. Then a few days out from the opening, we become more and more prolific with our tweets or with our posts so that people really know something is happening, right? Now, the next story arc in this story we'll overlay is the owner of the boutique. This is, again, her Twitter, but it can be Facebook or website or radio appearances, whatever it might be, right? And she talks about the same sort of thing. Now, she talks about the boutique and how excited she is to be moving it, but the actual things that she'll talk about will be potentially different to what the store Twitter account talks about. And that's what the overlay of the 2 stories means and why it's important. Then if you overlay Jenny Smith, who works at the boutique, she'll be talking about different things altogether, like how far the Boost Juice place is from the shop and what her favourite pieces are and how those pieces are only in the new store and so on. Then if you think about, well, all the other retweets and ad hoc engagement going on different platforms and stuff, that forms its own story arc as well, which you can see is the blue arrow that pervades everything. And then you might chuck in a few blog posts on your website as well at different parts along the way, maybe 5 blog posts to be able to say, this is what we're doing, we're opening new boutique and so on. So I reckon if you could use those, identify those story arcs as platforms that you're using or people that are involved in your business or whatever, you can tell a really sound story in that way. Now, that's kind of the 25 minute or 27 minutes of content that is high-level stuff that I really want to leave you with, and hopefully something from that without having to go any further. I'm happy to send this deck on to anyone who wants it if you need it as well. But if you did want to go deeper, where I'm actually going to do a much more in-depth, much longer session next week. We started these virtual conferences. First one is storytelling, the best low-cost marketing option for your business. So it's next Thursday, which is 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Now that's Sydney time. So we'll probably go longer than 2 hours, but I'm just going to say it's 2 hours. And over that time, I'm going to be talking about, again, why storytelling is important in more depth, structures in more depth as well. Real life examples then of how to use Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and your website as an amazing storytelling tool. The secrets of how Facebook and Twitter use storytelling, and that's a really interesting thing, and it might be completely different to how you're using it. Who's doing it well, and therefore who's not doing it well, and then lots and lots of time for Q&A at the end as well. So you can see that the tickets to that is $67. It's next Thursday, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Sydney time. And there's the link down at the bottom. So if you just go to nickbowditch.com.au/virtual conferences/storytelling, you can go through and fill in the form and get a ticket to that for next week. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation today, the free webinar. I really want to thank you for coming today. I really hope you've gotten something out of it. If you want any follow-up, please hit me up by the website, nickbowditch.com.au. The Real Nick Bowditch on Facebook and Twitter and Insta, you can hit me as well. I'd really love to see what you think about today and whether you've gotten something from it you can use. And remember, right at the start, all I wanted you to do was think differently about one thing. So I'm really happy. I'm really hoping that's what we've been able to achieve. All right, guys, thanks very much for joining, and I'll see you soon. Thanks very much.